We begin this news hour in Ukraine, which has once again come under widespread attack from Russian missiles. Explosions were reported in the capital Kyiv, where at least 3 people died after a missile hit a 2-story residential building. The city's mayor says critical infrastructure has also been targeted and that there are widespread power outages. The whole of the western city of Lviv is also without power after strikes on energy installations. Explosions were also reported in the south and southeast of the country. Neighboring Moldova has reported massive blackouts, although it has not been directly hit. Ukraine has already seen much of its energy infrastructure targeted this autumn, leading to both scheduled and emergency power cuts. As temperatures plunge, millions of people are without electricity. Officials in Ukraine's Zaporizhia region say a newborn baby has been killed by an overnight missile strike on a hospital. A woman and a doctor have been rescued in the rubble of a 2-story building in the town of Vilnyansk that included a maternity ward. It's understood the woman had been in labor at the time of the bombardment. Zaporizhia, where Europe's largest nuclear plant is located, has been the focus of repeated Russian attacks.
She said a missile hit the maternity hospital and she could not find her child. She was pulled out from under the rubble by the emergency workers. Her child was dead. Her legs were either burnt or wounded by shrapnel. Her face. And emotionally, she is devastated. The doctor was pulled out from under the rubble. And with the help of a ladder, a new mother was evacuated from the 2nd floor. Unfortunately, a newborn who was just 2 days died. Emergency workers kept searching for more people, but there were no more people trapped under the rubble.
Meanwhile, the European Parliament has passed a resolution recognizing Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. The measure, which is not binding, was passed overwhelmingly. It condemns what it calls deliberate attacks and atrocities carried out by Russia on Ukraine's civilian population. Well, the latest that we're hearing, of course, will be joined in a moment by the Eastern European Affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Leskiewicz, who's been keeping across all these developments. But the latest that we're hearing is that lots of alerts sounding not just in the capital, Kyiv, but across Ukraine. Lots of attacks, apparently, explosions heard all across the country. And as you heard in that intro there, Moldova, which I think its electricity supply is connected to Ukraine's, has also been plunged into a terrible blackout. Well, let's take you now to London, where the Eastern European Affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Leskiewicz, is waiting to talk to us. Good to see you, Dr. Leskiewicz. Once again, alerts sounding across the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Several explosions heard there and critical infrastructure said to have been hit. Reports also of explosions in other parts of the country as well. What do you make of all of that? I guess it's difficult to say exactly what has been hit.
Well, I think the most important point we can draw is quite simple, that Russia is fighting on, that any points that people had that maybe Russia may be thinking of withdrawing are simply wrong. And that therefore what is happening now is that Russia is, exactly as before, slowly exerting pressure on Ukraine so that Ukrainian citizens will think about perhaps coming to some sort of accord with Russia. I mean, that is the point of these attacks.
And of course, amid the rubble of those relentless Russian missile strikes on Ukraine, a newborn baby has become the latest civilian casualty. Help us understand the poignancy of this moment. Well,
of course, for people in Ukraine, especially for the parents of the baby, this is a tragedy. On the other hand, it has to be said that if missiles rain down upon civilian areas, then sooner or later tragedies like this will occur. And there's no question this is going to be repeated time and again for as long as the war continues, because as long as it continues, as long as civilian areas are attacked, there will be more such atrocities.
And Dr. Leskiewicz, as well as the threats of these strikes, Ukrainians also living with power cuts and below freezing temperatures. And it's only going to get colder, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But then that's the whole point of these missile strikes, is to try and weaken the resolve of the Ukrainian people to fight on. And this is, of course, going to be something that's going to continue throughout the whole of winter. Winter's always been a good time of year for the Russians. As you know, many invasions were halted in winter in the past. And this is a time when Russia will, of course, continue its pressure on Ukraine. And please note, it is by no means to be ruled out that there will be an offensive by the Russians during winter, because they are quite used to offensive operations in winter. This makes no difference to them in many ways. In some ways, in fact, they have an advantage over other nations when they carry out such a.
So while the Ukrainians have to live in fear of the possibility of that offensive that you're talking about, the other fear is that there are likely to be further missile strikes, as you pointed out, on energy installations, even as they're trying to repair them, which could further destabilize the situation and lead to more power cuts and perhaps other installations affected as temperatures continue to plummet.
Yes, I think we'll find also that apart from energy strikes, which he's doing now to try and, of course, because energy is very important, he may well strike other targets too. From his point of view, he's raining down missiles upon Ukraine. And he's obviously chosen the energy sector, but there's by no means to be excluded that other areas will also be struck, which are important, perhaps important in part of the infrastructure, the railway network, which of course have been struck before.
Yes, absolutely. And that's an important note of warning coming from you there. But just turning to the energy side of things, what are the people and the governments doing to prepare for that in Ukraine? Are the government, for example, providing refuge centers where people can go to get warm and get things like necessary things like fresh water as well?
Well, this can only be provided to a certain extent. It has to be understood that if the energy strikes affect the entire population, then there are no real refugee points. Staying in your own house is as good as anywhere else. The point about knocking out the electricity supplies and the older energy sector is that, if you like, the whole country becomes affected. So, no, that's not the solution. The solution is, if possible, to repair of the damage, which was done by Lviv recently. But of course, Lviv got attacked again, and once again is having to try to repair everything. And this is where the secret lies. If they can keep up the repairs and nullify missile strikes, then that will be to some extent a success for them. But obviously, if the Russians are sufficiently determined, they will be able to destroy enough of the energy sector so that no such repairs will be possible.
Dr. Leskiewicz, thank you very much. Always appreciate your analysis. Dr. Marek Leskiewicz is the Eastern European Affairs Analyst, and he was talking to me there from London.